I'm Wisal Al-Assad, president of the AUB Montreal Chapter. As you all know, the Montreal Chapter is active in the community and we always host events. Since during this pandemic and difficult time, we cannot connect with each other, so we thought to do that virtually and to discuss topics that could be of your interest. So we're starting today with our first virtual event. Our guest will be Dr. Ghassan Dbaibo. He's a faculty professor at the American University of Beirut in the Department of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. Dr. Dbaibo is also head of the Division of Pediatric Infectious Diseases and director for the Center of Infectious Diseases Research. So he's going to be discussing today the coronavirus and the pandemic, a little bit about the science, the myths, and the facts. I hope you will gonna all be able to tune in, and you can post your questions live if you wish. If you want us to discuss other topics, please send us an email or put us a comment on our Facebook page. So thank you again for tuning in, and I'd like to thank again Dr. Dbaibo for accepting our invitation. So we hope to see you soon.
So let me start. Thank you all for having me. It's really a pleasure. I hope you're all safe in Quebec and the wider world. So Wisal had sent me a list of questions that were asked, and I will address them one by one. The first question, or actually it was supposed to be an introduction, just to talk a little bit about RNA viruses, what makes them so different from DNA viruses and our own DNA. Well, in simple terms, RNA viruses, like all viruses, they want to replicate, they want to make more virus. That's their mission in the world. And what makes them different from DNA viruses and from our own DNA is that while replicating, they make a lot of mistakes, and they don't have the machinery that we have to correct those mistakes. So their mistakes get carried on in their progeny, in their daughter viruses. So the DNA machinery in us and in other mammals has a lot of corrective protein machinery to correct any mistakes that we make, so that we don't have mutations and we don't transmit those mutations. Whereas in RNA viruses, the mutations get carried over into daughter viruses. So that's why RNA viruses are continuously changing. And this is true for influenza viruses, and it is true for coronaviruses. So we see them as changing all the time. So this in a way gives them an advantage, so that when we make antibodies against RNA viruses, frequently those antibodies are not sufficient to protect us the rest of our lives against that same virus, because the virus is continuously mutating, continuously changing its capsid proteins, the proteins that are on the outside that we, as hosts for these viruses, we recognize in our immune system. So the first question was, what do we know about transmission of the virus? Through which animal? Can we draw a comparison between the influenza virus and the coronavirus? There are two scenarios of transmission. A, the virus evolved to its current pathogenic state through natural selection in a non-human host and then jumped to humans. Bats are the most likely reservoir for the SARS-CoV-2. or B, a non-pathogenic version of the virus jumped from an animal, the pangolin, which is a kind of anteater, into humans and then evolved to its current pathogenic state within the human population. Well, I think both versions or both the scenarios A and B could hold part of the truth. And this is usually similar to what happens in influenza viruses, where influenza viruses have the birds as their natural host, as the host that is most suited to receive influenza viruses, to get slightly sick from them, and then to pass them on to other birds. But every now and then, the virus jumps from the bird into another host. Sometimes it's the horse, sometimes it's the pig, sometimes it's a seal. Frequently, it's a different kind of intermediate host. And when these viruses are able to jump to a different host, they continuously mutate, they continuously recombine, because if there are two types of virus that infect the same host, then there is a very strong likelihood that a third type might come out of this co-infection. So when an intermediate host, let's say a pig, is infected by two different influenza viruses, let's say one is a bird virus and one is a pig virus, then it's a possibility that the third virus that comes out from the recombination of these two viruses will be related to both of the mother viruses, and it might have characteristics from both. So it can infect perhaps both birds and pigs very well. Another scenario might be when a human influenza virus and a bird influenza virus both infect a pig. And this can happen in the real world in farms where the human and the bird and the pig are all living in the same situation. And this has happened in the past, and the results have been new viruses that were capable of infecting humans instead of only infecting birds or only infecting pigs. So when a human virus recombines with a bird virus, there is a chance that the resulting virus might end up being capable of infecting the human host very well and very efficiently. Fortunately for us, the vast majority of these recombinant events are a dead end. So the resulting virus ends up being too inefficient or too cumbersome to be transmitted from one animal to a human, and then from that human to other humans. And this is really the rate limiting step in having pandemics. And we've seen this occur over and over the past 20 years, when bird influenza viruses have caused small outbreaks of a few cases that occurred mostly from people in direct contact with sick birds or sick pigs. And this contact has led to the infection of a human host, but that human host was not able to spread the virus very efficiently to other humans, perhaps except to family members or sometimes to healthcare workers who are in very close contact with that infected individual. So this has been a fortunate event for us in the case of influenza. And I don't think we'll be always fortunate. There will come a time as happened about 11 years ago, when a virus will come out from the recombination of a human and a bird influenza, or from the human and a pig influenza, and be able to infect humans successfully and to be transmitted from one human to the other successfully and easily. And this will be reason to consider another pandemic down the road. Now, when it comes to coronaviruses really have the same kind of setup. The natural host for the coronaviruses is the bat. Bats seem to be infected with coronaviruses, with hundreds of types of coronaviruses. So we've always been on the lookout for coronaviruses coming out of bats. And the coronaviruses that come out of bats usually cannot immediately infect a human being. Their proteins do not suit the receptors of the human host very well. So there usually is an intermediate host that allows the coronavirus that came out from a bat to infect an intermediate host and then mutate a little bit more, and then after several mutations to be adapted to infect the human host. So in this case, we have a long history with coronaviruses. Actually, the current SARS-CoV-2 is the 7th human coronavirus that we know of. We have 4 coronaviruses that we get sick from every year, or many of us get sick from every year, especially children, and they cause a very mild cold-like infection, runny nose, congestion, very mild fever, some body aches for a few days or a week, and then it goes away. Those 4 human coronaviruses originally came from bats. We don't know their history very well because our technology was not that good when they started infecting humans. But we know fairly well what happened with the first SARS pandemic and with the ongoing MERS-CoV pandemic. And these are 2 coronaviruses that came out from bats, then infected an intermediate host, and then started infecting humans. In the case of the first SARS-CoV, the severe acute respiratory syndrome virus, that's what SARS stands for. It came from a bat. It infected the civet cat. It's a very unusual mammal that is prevalent in Asia, and that the Chinese, among other things, consider a delicacy, and they eat it. And this civet cat, once it got infected, it was able, or at least the virus was able in that cat, to mutate some more, so that its spike proteins, that are the proteins that are sticking out of the virus, that really are the keys to open the receptors or the key locks that are present in our cells, so that they can stick to them and enter the cell and cause an infection. So those S proteins, or the spike proteins that come out of the coronavirus, they do not stick to any kind of cell. They need to have a receptor that they can open. And in the case of SARS virus, that spike protein gradually changed so that it was able to open the civet cat cells, and gradually it became able to open the human cells, and that caused the pandemic. So that's the story with the first SARS-CoV virus. For the MERS-CoV virus, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, which is still ongoing in the Gulf region, this coronavirus was able to infect camels after coming from bats. So in a situation where bats and camels were in close proximity, the camels started getting infected, and the camels were a good host for the coronavirus. So they were getting sick but not dying from coronavirus. So the virus was able to replicate and reproduce, and that process involves a lot of mutations. And those mutations allowed the virus to gradually change its spike protein to be able to infect humans. And again, the same story as with SARS. Those humans who were in very close proximity to the camels were infected, they got sick, they infected their family members because they were in very close proximity, and they were able to infect the healthcare workers who were taking care of them. But it did not turn out into a community outbreak or a community transmission type of pandemic. So this is how coronavirus historically have evolved. MERS-CoV is still ongoing, but the intermediate host, the camel, was gotten under control. So the authorities in several Gulf regions that were affected by MERS-CoV did mass screening on all their camels, the ones they use for farming, for transportation, for sports, for their daily life. They screened them. Those who were infected, they got rid of them. And those who were clear, they kept them. So they were able to control to a large degree the outbreak by getting the original host, or in this case, the intermediate host, under control. And this allowed the MERS-CoV to be checked. And because there is no effective human-to-human transmission, this got under control. In the current pandemic, the SARS-CoV-2, which is, this is the name of the virus, which is causing COVID-19, or the coronavirus disease that started in the year 2019, unfortunately for us, the virus is so good at transmission that it's very difficult to get it under control. So the hypothesis now is that the virus that originated in the bat came into an intermediate host. The leading candidate remains the pangolin, which is the anteater, and it infected the pangolin. Somehow, at some point, a recombinant event occurred where the spike protein of the pangolin, which has 99% homology to the current SARS-CoV-2 virus, was picked up by a bat virus that happened to infect the pangolin at the same time. So it must have been a pangolin that wandered into some cave where bats are living. And if you know much about bats, they are crowded, they eat together, they poop together, they urinate together. So their houses, the caves, are not very hygienic. So the pangolin, when it wanders into a cave that is infested by bats, can very likely pick up a bat coronavirus. And because it's a host that can welcome coronaviruses, because pangolins have a history also with coronaviruses, a recombination event can occur where a bat coronavirus and a pangolin coronavirus can infect the same pangolin, the same cell in the pangolin, and the resulting virus may pick up genes from the bat coronavirus and the pangolin coronavirus, and that recombination event will, unfortunately for us, lead to a new virus that has a lot of homology to the, meaning the sequence of the DNA of the RNA of the bat coronavirus is very similar to the original bat virus, but it has picked up the spike protein gene from the pangolin. So this is now the most likely hypothesis to explain what happened to the current SARS-CoV-2. We still need some data to prove this hypothesis. We don't have the final proof yet. It's still a leading hypothesis. But here we are. Right now, this is kind of interesting, but it doesn't help us much in the current situation that we have. So I hope I answered those questions. If not, somebody type me a note so that I can expand some more. Okay, the second question is, we know that virus is transmitted through human droplets. Can the virus infect humans through an open cut? So this is a good question. Skin is an important barrier for many infections, and we get bacteria through skin cuts. We can get some viruses through skin cuts, like the Ebola virus, for example. But in the case of corona viruses, depending on their receptor, the current coronavirus, the SARS-CoV, needs a specific receptor that is not present everywhere in our body. So it's not present on our skin. If our skin is cut, the exposed tissues, which include some blood vessels and some fat tissue and connective tissue, usually does not have the receptor, the ACE2 receptor, which has a lot of normal functions for our body. So the ACE2 receptor is not expressed well in connective tissue and in the skin. Now it is expressed in the inner lining of blood vessels. So it can infect the inside of a blood vessel. So if the open wound is actively bleeding and you put in a lot of virus in that open blood vessel, theoretically the possibility of an infection is there. But the chances of this happening are very, very, very small, because if the blood vessel is open, that means there is blood coming out of that blood vessel. So for the viral particle, the virus particle, it will be washed out with the blood that's coming out. So it's very unlikely for it to be able to go in and stick on the inside of a blood vessel that's supposed to be either bleeding or to have constricted completely to stop the blood flow. So the chances are exceedingly small for this to happen. Now the third question is, why would a person transmit the virus while he or she is still asymptomatic? Well, this is unfortunately not something new for viruses. All viruses can do this. And the reason is, the virus, when it comes in our body, its mission is to replicate and to reproduce and to make more virus. We start showing symptoms when our immune system recognizes that there is a virus inside us. Okay? So if our immune system doesn't recognize that there is a virus, the virus can go on multiplying, reproducing before the signs show up. Okay? So there is always a window of 1 to 2, sometimes 3 days for a lot of viruses when we are infected we are allowing the virus to reproduce before we can show symptoms. The symptoms start when our immune system recognizes the virus and we start having the symptoms, the runny nose, the cough, which are immune response symptoms. The runny nose is basically mucus trying to wash out the virus from our body. The cough is an immune response symptom, which is again trying to clear up our lungs from an invading microbe. The fever is an immune response to try to slow down the replication of many viruses and many bacteria. And these are signals that our immune system, the different hormones and the different specialized bacteria that our, specialized cells that our body activates in an immune response, all of these come to the site of the infection. And when they come to the site of the infection, the battle that is going on between the immune cells or the immune system and the invading microbe show up as symptoms for us. So we start getting all the symptoms that I talked to you about, including the fatigue and the malaise and the feeling unwell. All of these are actually from the hormones of the immune system, the different cytokines, interferon, interleukins, etc. These are specialized hormones that activate or regulate our immune system. So there is always that window when we can infect with the virus, because the virus is replicating in our respiratory tract, in our nose, in our mouth, in our throat. And as we are speaking or coughing, viral particles can be spit out and infect people around us. And there is another scenario when people with a very well-regulated immune system may be able to kind of mount an immune response to the virus without all of these battles going on, without the fever, without the cough, without the runny nose, yet they are able to control or mount an immune response to the virus and be able to control the infection within 1, 2, or 3 weeks and not show much symptoms at all. This occurs with other viruses, usually because whoever developed the infection had some immunity against the virus in question, and this allowed him or her to control the viral infection without developing much symptoms. We have evidence for other viruses being transmitted that way without showing symptoms on the person. Now, for this particular virus, we don't know which individuals are the ones who get an asymptomatic infection and which individuals are the ones who get really sick from the virus and go to the intensive care unit and, God forbid, die, and who are the ones in between who get sick with like a flu-like illness with fever, body aches, cough, etc., and then they recover and they do okay, but they don't go to the hospital. So we have the full spectrum of what we see with viruses overall. Now, because this is the same virus that's infecting everybody and we have these different outcomes, then the most likely answer is that the host, our bodies, are what determines the outcome. So there are some people who may have some natural immunity who are able to control the virus, perhaps like the young children who are not getting sick because they get sick from coronaviruses all the time. And there is a very strong likelihood that the immunity that we develop against other coronaviruses may be helpful in getting SARS-CoV-2 slightly under control. This is one of the leading hypotheses as to why children are not getting sick from coronavirus. Now, the elderly, they get very sick at a higher frequency. And one explanation is that their immune system has decayed, has undergone senescence, has become old and inefficient. And that might explain why their immune response may be inefficient. So it tries to get the virus from here and from there, and this might actually fire back where it causes a significant bombastic kind of immune response that actually hurts much more than it helps. This is all currently being studied and trying to understand the molecular pathways that are leading to this outcome. I'm sorry about the long response, but this is a very interesting question. The fourth question is, what is the recommendation for people with predisposed conditions, such as children with asthma? Right now, children with asthma, including those that were seen in China, they did not have a much worse outcome compared to other children. So they don't seem to be at a significantly higher risk than other children. But I say that with some caution because we don't have a lot of data yet about children and about which children are at higher risk than others. We know that ones with a weak immune system might be at higher risk, but as far as other categories, I would venture to say that those with heart disease and those with chronic lung disease, perhaps as asthma, they should be protected as much as we can. And protection, as we are all supposed to be doing, is to minimize exposure, to keep them at home for now, not expose them to the outside world, try to keep them sheltered and protected until a day, hopefully soon, when there is a vaccine they can take and they can improve their immunity. Beyond that, there isn't much practical advice that we can give besides sheltering, keeping them at home, not exposing them to the outside world. The fifth question is in 3 parts. Recommendations for cleaning items. Is soap and water enough? What is the recommendation for handling mail deliveries? How should we wash fruits and vegetables? And then shoes. Okay, so these are important practical questions. So soap and water generally is more than enough for getting rid of coronavirus and a lot of other viruses. Luckily for us, coronavirus is not a very hardy virus. So what keeps coronavirus stuck together, the proteins that are around the virus, is a layer of fat that the virus picks up from our body. As it's coming out of the cell, it takes a little bit of fat from our cells to keep the protein parts glued together. So these fats can be washed off with soap and water. And once we wash the fat off, the virus comes apart. The RNA inside the virus is very sensitive. It degrades very quickly and can be gotten rid of. Now, so soap and water for most things is more than enough. Now, for the questions that were answered, is the virus, can it be transmitted by packages? Can it stick to our shoes? Can it stick to fruits and vegetables? The answer is yes. If somebody coughs on our vegetables and fruits, if somebody coughs on our packages, yes, we can. Those can be contaminated. The answer is, for fruits and vegetables, you're going to wash your fruits and vegetables anyway. So if you use a little bit of soap to wash your fruits and vegetables, you should be safe. For delivered packages or anything that is being delivered to your home, you have to consider that the package is contaminated. So when you handle the package, handle it with care, meaning consider that when you handle the package, you open it, your hands became contaminated. Open it in a way such so that the inside of the package gets emptied or delivered without you touching it before you wash your hands. So that's one way. If what's inside the package is another package that you are worried that may have been contaminated when it was first placed into the package, then you need to wipe it with some alcohol or some very dilute Clorox containing liquid so that you will get rid of the virus. And usually 60 to 70% alcohol is more than sufficient to get rid of the virus, because alcohol also disrupts that fat layer that that is needed to keep the virus together. As for shoes, there is really no evidence that shoes can transmit the virus. If you want to be extra careful, you can take off your shoes when you come in. Don't walk into the kitchen with your shoes. But again, I think all consider that the floor is dirty, the shoes are dirty. So when you drop something to the floor, don't eat it, don't put it in your mouth, don't put your hand on the floor and then touch your mouth, and etc. The virus is not gonna fly from the floor to contaminate your mouth or your eyes or your nose, and so you are unlikely to get the virus from the floor. Question number 6. There's a controversy on PPEs. We currently have around 4,000 cases in Quebec. We are supposed to wear gloves and masks when we leave our houses, especially that PPEs are not widely available and people on front line need them more. Do surgical masks offer enough protection? I don't know if this is a fact or a question. I don't know if it's a rule now for Quebec to go out wearing gloves and masks. My son lives in Montreal. He didn't tell me that that's the case. But if it is the case, my son doesn't know about it. And it's really not needed. The PPEs, or you have to understand the differences between a regular mask, the surgical mask that is put behind the ear, the one that's kind of blue usually, or maybe a white, and then the N95, the one that comes in and you have to stick it to the nose and mouth. These have to be used very correctly, otherwise they will do more harm than good. Okay, now the N95, the one that is kind of bulbous and you have to put it on your nose and mouth, and it has to seal around your nose and mouth. This is called, in the hospital, it's called fitting. It has to fit, and not all faces get have a good fit for the different N95 sizes. They come from different makers, different brands, and different sizes. So if you put an unfitting N95 mask on your face and on your nose and mouth, and it's leaking on the sides, then as you are breathing, you are generating a very strong jet. You take a breath, there is a strong jet that comes in from the sides, outside of the mask, and this strong jet is more likely to suck in whatever is in your environment without going through the filter. So if you don't have an appropriately fit N95 mask, don't use it. It's going to cause more harm than good. So if you're in an environment where there's a lot of coronavirus flying around, such as somebody coughing very close to you, this is not going to be safe, okay? In the hospital, we don't use N95s except when there is a procedure being done to the patient infected with coronavirus, such as intubation, putting a breathing tube inside their lungs, or suctioning them, putting a tube to suction the respiratory secretions that are full of coronavirus, or when they are having a very close examination and we are worried that the patient may cough or sneeze when we are very close to them. Short of that, we only wear the surgical masks, the blue masks that are put on the nose and mouth. And those are really not to protect us as much as it is to protect the patient. So they are good for preventing air that is coming out from the patient or that has coronavirus from going out of the mask. So the virus gets trapped inside the mask. As for from the outside, it only protects against droplets. So droplets, such as if somebody splashes water or mucus or something that comes in, it will protect to a certain degree the splash from that. But it's not 100% protection. The N95 is much better in that regard. Touching the mask on the outside is very likely to contaminate your hands. And if you are not careful to wash your hands, then again, this is one way to get the virus. The mask itself has to be changed frequently. So it has to be changed several times during the day. And again, we have a shortage of masks worldwide. So if you are going out and changing the mask several times a day, then that is a waste of resources. Gloves are the same thing. The gloves, they give you a feeling that you are protected, but the gloves quickly become contaminated. So if you're not changing your gloves frequently, it defeats the purpose. So the gloves become contaminated. If you accidentally touch your eye or nose or mouth with your gloves, then you have exposed yourself. So it's better not to wear those in public on the streets unless you are going into a crowded place. If you are going into a supermarket where there are a lot of people around you and you want to feel reassured that nobody is going to cough in your face or expose you quickly. So the seventh question, why epidemics happen every now and then, and why were we predicting that an epidemic will happen soon? Well, I explained why in my introduction, because we know that in parts of the world, particularly in Asian countries, there are a lot of opportunities for viruses, influenza viruses, to mix between birds, pigs, and humans. They raise ducks and chicken, they raise pigs at the same time, and they take care of them. So there is a lot of mixture. And I emphasize pigs because pigs are the closest as far as receptors and tissues to humans. So infecting them is the closest step to get the infection to work in humans, although there are other intermediate hosts, as I mentioned. And we are always afraid about a new virus emerging that can be very efficient at infecting humans and very efficient at being transmitted from human to human. So this has always been the worry of the WHO. In fact, the WHO has a program called pandemic preparedness, which is conducted with all health ministries of health in all governments around the world. Some cooperate, others don't cooperate. But the program is there to train governments as to how to respond to a pandemic, what to do in the case of the pandemic. And we are seeing now the results of the pandemic preparedness. Some governments were very prepared and they were able to get the pandemic under control in their countries. Others were a complete failure and things are out of control and continue to be. So we have been expecting this to happen, and honestly, we've been expecting an influenza pandemic, not a coronavirus pandemic. The coronaviruses, they showed their potential with SARS and MERS-CoV, but nobody had really the prediction that coronavirus is going to be, except, you know, it was always number two. It was more influenza as number one, coronavirus number two, and then the other list of viruses which are not very efficient at transmission from a human to other. You know, we heard recently about hantavirus in China. Ebola, of course, was always a scare, but these viruses are not efficient at transmitting from human to human. You really have to have very close contact to have that kind of transmission. The eighth question, how long will this pandemic last? Will COVID-19 hit again? Are people who already caught the virus immune now and they won't catch it again? If the virus hits again, would it be in its current form or has undergone another mutation? Very excellent questions. So what will happen? This virus, unfortunately for us, has very bad traits. It has the ability to transmit from one person to the other very efficiently. It has the ability to infect individuals who don't know that they are infected, so they can pass the infection to others unknowingly. It can kill. It can kill not only the elderly, but it can kill middle-aged people. It can kill young people in their 20s and 30s. True, the majority of victims have been elderly, have been or have had other ongoing problems, heart, hypertension, diabetes, etc. But it has also killed a lot of otherwise healthy individuals. And this is something we are still unable to explain. Is it something related to the host, meaning the host is mounting a very strong inflammatory reaction because their genetics is programmed that way? Or is it because the load of virus that they got was so high that it overwhelmed their immune system, which is something we also see in other viruses? We don't know. So we have these characteristics of the virus, and unfortunately, we won't be able to control this virus unless we develop a vaccine where we are able to immunize large segments of the population so that we develop herd immunity. Herd immunity meaning when a large percentage of the population has become immune to the virus and the virus cannot find new victims. So it gets trapped in a person where it causes an infection, but everybody around that person is immune, so it cannot be transmitted anymore. So it dies with that person, or hopefully that person will recover, but the virus cannot be transmitted. So that's the concept of herd immunity. So immunization would be necessary, or as is currently happening, immunity develops in a large segment of the population from being naturally infected. And this might be going on now because as we learn more about the virus, for every case we know about, there seem to be anywhere from 10 to 20 cases that are going unrecognized, either because their illness was very mild or because they had an asymptomatic infection without symptoms. So these will end up being the herd that will protect the other susceptible people who are now hiding in their homes and not being exposed. They will protect them from getting infected. So if we are all hiding at home, who will be the herd, the protected herd? It will not happen very easily. Once the lockdown is ended and we resume work gradually, we are likely to have another wave of infection that will cause another series of infections, another series of hospitalizations, ICUs, and unfortunately deaths. So we are expecting to see those waves occur over the coming 6 months, perhaps 12 months, perhaps 18 months, some of the predictions. Hopefully not. Hopefully by then we will have developed a vaccine and we'll be able to immunize a lot of people. What will happen to coronavirus then? My prediction, and a lot of predictions, are that this coronavirus will end up being a regular coronavirus that will transmit regularly through the population. Once we have herd immunity, we will keep getting this virus repeatedly. But now that we have been exposed once, we have developed a lot of immunity, not enough to prevent the infection completely, because the immunity against coronaviruses usually lasts about 6 to 12 months and then it goes away. Similar to the influenza immunity, because the virus is continuously mutating. So we will be protected for this season, but for next season, we might be susceptible again. So those who got the infection may need to be vaccinated again to protect them from getting sick. But also, if they do get sick, they are much more likely to get a milder form of the illness. This is all hypothesis and based on our experience with other coronaviruses. We don't know if this will pan out. Hopefully it will, because the alternative is to have a continuously bad virus that will keep finding every susceptible individual and infected. The last question, do you think the world or / the people will go back to their normal life, meaning being comfortable to be in crowded places like public transportation and indoor concerts and cinemas? We are all waiting for that moment. We are all stuck or locked down in our homes and not being able to see our loved ones, mingle with our friends, do all the things that we love to do. Unfortunately, all of these activities help the virus get transmitted. So the decisions are going to be made locally. So when a community or a country sees a significant slowing down of community-acquired cases, as they did in China, they will gradually release the lockdown to allow perhaps workers in factories to go back to their work, etc., gradually to get to students and universities and schools and perhaps daycares. I don't know. But with vigilant surveillance, that is to keep track of the new cases that are occurring. If we are lucky, things might slow down a bit during the summer months, but we cannot bet on that. The last pandemic with influenza occurred in the summertime, occurred in August in the temperate region. And then the second big peak occurred in late September and October. So we cannot bet on the summer giving us a respite from COVID-19. The days are ahead and the weeks are ahead to see how it will play out. We are watching China very closely to see what is going on in China. They have a very sophisticated citizen tracking system in place that I don't think exists anywhere else in the world, that tracks contacts, that tracks temperatures, that tracks all kinds of detailed information, and they are able to identify people who are sick and to isolate them and ask them to lock down, and they will make them lock down. It's not an option. So that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. They're doing it in South Korea in a different manner by testing a lot of people, testing their contacts, and asking them to isolate. How is it playing in Canada, in the US, in Lebanon, in different countries is very different. So we are learning from each other's experience to see or to determine what's the best way to make decisions and to allow people to resume their normal lives before without risking a significant surge in the number of cases. I think that was the last question. And I'm sorry I took a long time, but I hope it was beneficial, and I hope I answered the questions as you wanted them to be, or that educated you a little bit. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer if somebody wants to type a comment. Wisal, if you are okay, 2 questions posted and many greetings to you. Okay, thank you very much. But I didn't see the questions. Let's see, try again. Oh, okay, sorry. Pop, pop, pop. Does getting COVID-19 lower our immunity on the long run? What effect it has on our bodies? Well, getting the virus, getting the infection, doesn't itself lower immunity. In fact, those people who are getting really sick actually are getting a very strong immune response. We call it technically the cytokine storm. So it's like a storm of response. Instead of shooting at the virus with a little gun, our body is sending rockets, bombers, nuclear bombs to try to kill that virus. So that's why there's a lot of damage to the body. In the long run, we don't have much data yet, but those people who recovered from moderate or mild infections, they've had their immune system functioning very well, and their antibodies are high, and they can neutralize the virus. That is, they can prevent it from causing infection. But and actually they are useful in getting plasma from them and giving it to those who are infected, who have severe infections, because that seems to work in controlling the infection. Long-term studies, we don't know yet if it has any untoward effects. And okay, so I think I answered the question about the masks. Okay, hi to everybody, Karim and Tamer, and the name is everyone. Thank you so much for your greetings. Okay, I think we will end it here, and uh, hope to see you all soon. And thank you very much for hosting me. Bye.